5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Please do not change channel.
From Krypton Radio, brought to you by Famous Faces and Funnies and Off the Chain with Yvonne Mason, it's the Hangin With Web Show Radio Hour, the Internet's premier pop culture talk radio show. You're tuned in, you're logged on, and now your hosts, GW Pomichter and Christian Basil. Who you hanging with?
Hello, Krypton Radio. Welcome to the Hangin With Web Show's great radio hour here, and we are here in the studio and getting ready to start another fantastic show for you. I'm GW Pomichter.
I am Sage Ia.
And tonight we are going to talk about a popular culture icon, the one and only Stan Lee. Just this last week, on November 12th, Stan passed away at just 95 years young. And fans and fellow artists and creators all over the world this past week have been in mourning the loss of a true popular culture, comic culture icon. Stan started his career more than 75 years ago, at around 19 years old.
Yes. And
for every one of those 75 years, he lived up to his trademark word, Excelsior. He lived a life filled with excellence and a life filled with creativity and promise. And as fans of the Marvel comic universes that he worked in and created, all of us here at the Hangin With Web Show mourn the passing of Stan. But tonight we didn't want it to be about mourning. We wanted to celebrate the life and times of a true comic culture icon. So what we're going to do tonight is really turn tonight into sort of the bio show of Stan Lee. Many of you out there will be familiar with Stan's career, his work. Many of you are already familiar with his life story and the work that he did. But we're going to share those things anyway, and we're going to talk a little bit about Stan and his journey as an artist and creator and what he meant to millions of people around the world. Wow, I mean,
it truly
takes you back. It's almost you're almost speechless to think that we're talking about someone who has been invited into the lives and homes of 1 billion people around the world, whose presence on screen and whose name on the cover of those comics has really brought him into the lives of so many people.
If you look, just on Twitter alone, if you look at the amount of outpouring from folks,
it's incredible.
It really is, and one of the things that I have loved seeing is the tribute in comic form.
Yes. Artists around the world for the past few days have been posting variations of Stan himself, variations of his covers. I saw a truly beautiful set of comic panels earlier today that illustrated it was Stan, and he was sort of being blown away like the dust in Infinity War. And it showed his pencil at the desk, and it was a beautiful tribute in Stan's own medium.
I saw one that touched me, and it was Superman, who is hugging a young Peter Parker, and he said, "It's okay, everybody hurts." And I was just like, "Oh man!"
All across the comic culture spectrum.
It has. He's touched
and
so
popular
many lives.
culture in general. I mean, here's a guy that has been a part of so many movies and television shows, even just through cameo appearances. He has been invited into people's homes since, I believe, 1973. He started acting in comic properties as a voice.
And he loved them. Do you know, even just a few days before he passed, he was still talking about doing more cameos. He got such a kick out of that.
And it's interesting, and we'll talk a little bit more in the hour about this when we get to that part of his career, but in tribute to the fans, the people who love Stan Lee and look forward to those cameos and have always spun wild fan theories around how Stan Lee, is tied together in the cinematic universe. As a tribute to that, James Gunn actually took a fan theory and made it canon in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, and we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on in the show. But I think let's just start with Stan Lee and his life, the life and times of Stan Lee. Imagine, if you will, and it's really hard. It's going to be 2019 here in just a month and a half. We're at 2019. Almost a century ago, in December of 1922, Stanley Martin Lieber was born in New York City. And interestingly enough, a lot of authors and writers and artists have pen names. But that wasn't what Stan set out to do. Stanley Martin Lieber was his name, and he couldn't wait to use it. And in those early days, he said he was going to use his name, Stanley Martin Lieber, when he wrote the great American novel. That would be, the name on the front of the book. When he wrote a novel or a book. And in those days, that was important. Being a literary writer was important. But being a comic writer wasn't respected or admired or looked up to. These weren't the guys you wanted to be when you grew up. And so, in 1941, when Stan was offered a spot as a writer, writing filler, the little filler panels, in a Captain America comic. It was Captain America number 3, which was Captain America foils the Traitor's Revenge. And Stan was a filler, and he published that under the pseudonym Stan Lee, because he didn't want his name associated with his work as a comics writer, because back then it wasn't the thing to be.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is an amazing piece of comic history trivia, in that Stan Lee is a name that is known far and wide throughout not just comic culture, but popular culture in general. And it's known for being a creative brand that takes those comic characters, superheroes and supervillains, and transforms them into literary icons.
Yes, and all around the globe. Nay, the universe.
Yeah, it is unfathomable to think of a time when Stan Lee was actually sort of a mask. It was a mask so that Stan himself could go into what was then considered legitimate writing. And, he started at Marvel Comics, what it was then Goodman's company, the Martin Goodman Publishing Company. And he started there with folks like Jack Kirby, who is a legend in the comic industry. And he started with these folks in his teens as an assistant. And in Stan's own words, his job in those early years was largely fetching coffee and taking the trash out. And he expressed a desire to write. And so in 1941, about 2 years after he started working at the Timely Comics division of Martin Goodman's, they asked him if he would do some fill writing. And he did that for Captain America Foils the Traitor's Revenge. That's Captain America Comics number 3, if you all want to know what Stan's debut comic was. It's Captain America Comics number 3. It's dated in May 1941, and it was his debut as a writer of any kind. And it wouldn't be for a little while yet when he would graduate into actually writing for what would become Marvel Comics later. And so, it is unfathomable, even as a middle-aged man, that, this is nearly a century ago that Martin Lieber was born, got a job during the Depression as a comic writer, as a comic assistant, and worked his way to writer, and became a legend.
Yes.
Stan himself is truly a legend in comic culture, whether it be for his numerous, appearances at conventions and pop culture events over the years. One of the coolest things to see this past week has been the photos that have been shared on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter of everyone, just everyone, who's ever stood in line and done a photo op with Stan or been in a thing. Here at the show, we have a really dear friend and fellow talk show host and fellow creative mind, Mr. Mark B. Lee out of Orlando, Florida, who has made a career hosting celebrity panels and events throughout the country at various Comic-Con events. And he posted a collage of pictures at different events around the country where he hosted Stan Lee panels.
That was beautiful.
It was. And so many of our Hangin' With Web Show alums were posting pictures of them and Stan at a convention, in a parking lot, in an elevator, wherever they could grab a picture and be a part of that piece of pop culture legacy, I guess you could say. And so from his early career, he graduated fairly quickly, a couple of years, from filler writer to actual, to writing stories for the fledgling comic company. He did multiple co-writings, but the first co-creation of Stan Lee was the Destroyer in Mystic Comics number 6. That was the first co-creation that Stan worked on as a real writer, not writing filler, not substituting or anything else, but as a creative mind. And if you guys want to look, you guys can look that up online. You can check it out as the Destroyer, Mystic Comics number 6. Just a few months later, after his debut in May of 1941, in August of 1941, he was creating characters and creating story. Just a fantastic thing. We're going to spend the hour tonight talking about Stan's career, talking about some of the projects he worked on, and a little bit of his biography. When we come back from our break, we're going to discuss his early career, some of the trials and tribulations of that career. We're also going to talk about some of his most notable creations, and the reason why and what he was working toward creating. And then we're going to get into his pop culture appearances and cameo, film appearances, etc. So stick around for the remainder of the hour. Again, this entire episode is dedicated to the life and times of Marvel Comics Stan Lee. At 95 years old, passed away just here on November 12th. So, stay tuned in and stay logged on. And we'll be right back.
It's Germany, 1938. Charlotte is a 15-year-old girl living in the Jewish quarter. George lives in the city proper, and enamored by Charlotte's charm and grace when she wanders into his cobbler shop, George decides right then and there that he is going to marry her. Follow along as this unlikely couple struggles to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo and their dramatic escape from Nazi Germany. Good Things Always Happen in Springtime, from author Joanne Fisher, on Amazon.com today. Famous Faces and Funnies in Melbourne, Florida is leading the way in pop culture fun. From comic books and graphic novels to Funko Pops and collector's items, Famous Faces and Funnies has it all. Rick Shea and the professional team at Famous Faces and Funnies are friendly and knowledgeable. Whether you're looking for toys, props, collector treasures, or a new comic book, Famous Faces and Funnies is your one-stop shop. To find Famous Faces and Funnies on Facebook and Twitter, just type at FFF Comics. From author Sherry Rensler comes the Evening Bower series, a prophecy from the lost city of Atlantis, a pairing whose union will change the future. Magical creatures, prophecy, destiny, and love collide in a new kind of romance. It's Sherry Rensler's Evening Bower series, a haunting and compelling tale pulled from humanity's lost histories. Begin the adventure with Time and Blood on Amazon.com today. Forever is only the beginning.
All right. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. You're listening to the Hangin With Web Show Radio Hour. I'm GW Pomichter.
I am Sage Ia.
And tonight's show, a little quieter, a little more low-key than we typically do. Tonight we are remembering the life and times of comic legend and creator Stan Lee. The world knows at 95 years old, Stan passed away on November 12th, just this past week. And it has left a tremendous hole in popular culture, one that is felt around the world in so many ways. Before the break, we talked a little bit about Stan Lee's early years. Born in 1922, by 1939 he's working as an assistant for Timely Comics. In 1941. He gets to write for the first time. He writes some filler for Captain America Comics number 3. And very quickly, within a few months, he starts working as a collaborative writer there at Timely Comics. And he co-creates Destroyer in Mystic Comics number 6. And goes on, of course, to co-create many, many characters across the Marvel Universe. And during the golden age of comics, he debuted Jack Frost in USA Comics number 1, Father Time in Captain America number 6, so many others, working beside giants in the industry. And it was an amazing time in his life. But not everything is smooth. Because later that year, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor is attacked, and America goes to war. Like many young men in those days, young Stan Lee joined the U.S. Army in early 1942.
Do you know that was one of the last pictures that he posted?
Was it really?
During Veterans Day, yeah. He posted a picture of himself in the Army.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. He served in the Signal Corps in the Army.
Mm-hmm. But not for long.
No. He started out repairing telegraph poles and communications equipment and things in the Signal Corps. But he was transferred over for his artistic talents to the Training Film Division. Now, as a former Army infantryman myself, we used to get a kick out of watching some of the very old World War II era training films. They were not a part of traditional training when I was serving, which was, oh my Lord, still 30 years ago. But we did get to see some of the older films, and they were amusing, to say the least. And so he worked writing training manuals and working on training films, and even doing some cartooning, early cartooning.
Well, he was bitten by the bug at that point. So.
Yes. Well, Stan was one of only a handful of people ever classified by the Army as a playwright.
That's pretty sweet.
I think there were only, I think Stan's bio I read not long ago, there were only 9 people ever in the Army that the Army actually classified as playwrights, and Stan was one of them. So his career in the Army was off and going, and he came home in 1945 at the end of the war, and started back at his career. And having done really well in those early years over at Timely Comics, he was just 19 years old before he left for the war, and he was promoted to interim editor there. And he continued to work there, and he went back to work there after his time in the Army. And obviously, most people from that point on know Stan's career. He was there at what became Marvel Comics until 1972. And he actually succeeded Goodman as the publisher of Marvel Comics. And early on, they said he had a knack. He just had a knack for the business of comics and for marketing comics.
That he did.
And his later career shows that knack.
Yes.
Because I would dare say, and you guys can tell me here in the studio if I'm off base here, Stan Lee is one of, if not the most significant, he's certainly one of the most significant reasons why the modern comic culture exists in the form that it does. His ability to not just to create the work, but to promote it, to add depth to something and explain the depth. We want to go back to, we talk a lot on the show about the comic culture and comic creations that are truly works of literature in their own right. When we look back early at Simon & Schuster and Superman, and we see a messianic hero's tale. Mm-hmm. It could have been plucked right from the Old or New Testament of the Bible, which is the best-selling book on the face of the planet, so it counts as literature. And we look at later iterations. Again, we're talking about Stan, so we'll go over to Marvel Comics. We're talking about the X-Men, which took on, in the 1960s and 1970s, the issue of civil rights, the issue of equality, the issue of how we look and treat one another as human beings. So this he added a depth and an understanding that comic books, they're great to look at. The pictures are awesome. The art is amazing, but the stories are literature.
Yes.
And in that vein, even today, as we travel around to comic conventions and other places, there's a huge movement to use comic books in classrooms to teach, to not only teach and get children interested in reading, but to teach them classic stories and classic storytelling through the comic medium. And that was something that Stan himself was a huge advocate for, understanding that his characters and his stories were literary works. And it's not a place he ever thought he would be. Stan himself, many, many times in early interviews, would say when he started his career, he didn't think any higher of it than most other people did. He didn't understand. He said 1,000 times, there are so many people with jobs so much more important than my job. And he didn't see the role of the arts and entertainment community in the lives of everyday people until he got older and realized how important those recreational hours that we spend reading comics and reading books and watching movies, how important they are to our lives and giving us hope and purpose and teaching us life lessons. So it wasn't a place that he started out to go.
But he did something wonderful, and he grounded all his characters. He gave them, everyday problems.
Yeah.
Peter Parker has acne. It's okay. So do the rest of us. And so that was nice, It gave you something. It gave you something to look at. It made you feel.
It did.
Hey,
it did.
He can do. He has that. I have that. But then you can watch that progression and that growth in the characters. And I think that's one of the great tie-ins for literature. For those, especially like in comics, we're talking about comics in the classroom. Sometimes you don't get it when you're reading some of the classic literature. But if you grab a comic and it's basically the same story, all of a sudden now it begins to make sense to you. And
No,
that's a phenomenal
the hero's
thing.
journey in a classic literary tale is the journey is the same, but the distance between point A and point B, it seems to be a shorter distance. You know, we recognize even in the simple farm boy that is Arthur before he's King Arthur, we recognize his lineage. We recognize there's greatness there. It's he will pull the sword from the stone. He won't become great. He will demonstrate his greatness. So the distance of that hero's journey is shorter. What Stan was able to do in a contemporary environment was show you a real transformation. Mm-hmm. The hero's journey became deeper, more complex. It became a much longer distance to travel. You know, when you give a teenager in, say, Spider-Man, superpowers, his hero's journey is at a very early beginning. You know, here's a young person, he has hardly become a person in the world that he's going to live in, and yet he's now a hero. And he's going to have to cope with all of the human dramas of not just being an example and an exemplary hero, but becoming a good man, becoming a good person.
Exactly.
And, you know, Stan added a level of complexity to characters and to the universes. And it wasn't just Stan. Everything that Stan did was a collaboration with some fantastic creators whose names are almost as iconic as his, working with Bill Everett and Steve Ditko, and so many others, that it is it's almost unfair, the credit that we give to Stan for that work. But at the end, he was the face. He was the face of a movement.
Do you know something that I didn't know?
What's that?
You know, we were talking about his early Army career,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned that he was just one of only 8, I think you said,
Mm-hmm.
for in the training film division. One of the people that he collaborated with there
Mm-hmm.
was Theodore Giesel, who is better known as Dr. Seuss. How fantastic is that? Stan Lee and Dr. Seuss, back in the day, under their given names.
Serving, that's right.
That's it. Serving and creating together.
That's amazing.
It
That's
is.
amazing. Serving and creating, that's a fantastic thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talk to so many of our Hangin' With Web Show alums who are creating today after their service. We have so many veterans that have served and who have come out and started creative careers. And so there are people, again, the motto of the show has always been create, aspire to great things, and inspire others. And so there you have it. There are 2 names, Stan Lee and Dr. Seuss, who served and then right afterwards began to create and aspired to become great and succeeded, and both of whom inspired generations that followed. We have to take a break, folks, and as we do that, we're going to continue to brush up on our research skills here, and we're going to find out as much more about Stan Lee as we can, and we're going to share it with you when we come back. Again, this whole hour is dedicated to comic icon Stan Lee, who passed away at 95 on November 12th, and we're going to spend the next 2 segments of the show sharing bits and pieces of his life. We have talked about his early days. We have talked about his Army days. And when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the golden silver age of comics, and then on to Hollywood. So stay tuned in and stay logged on, and we'll be right back.
In the summer of 1953, private investigator Will Lucky Marks was working as the in-house private eye for Arcane Pacific Pictures. Trapped inside the studio with the killer, Lucky must find the killer before time runs out. Lot 28. Own it today. Available iTunes and Amazon.com.
Greetings, true believers. This is absolutely, positively not Stan Lee, reminding you that you are listening to Krypton Radio. Krypton? That's the other guys. It's sci-fi for your Wi-Fi. Excelsior!
The Hanging With Web Show Radio Hour on Krypton Radio, bringing you the very best in pop culture talk radio. Each Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, the Hanging With Web Show Radio Hour with your hosts GW Pomichter and Christian Basil, who are hanging with rising pop culture newcomers as well as superstar icons. The Hanging With Web Show Radio Hour. Tune in Thursday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Who are you hanging with?
All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Hangin' With Web Show Radio Hours special Stan Lee edition. I'm GW Pomichter.
I am Sage Ia.
And we are spending this hour in tribute to Marvel Comics comic icon Stan Lee. At the top of the hour, we discuss Stan's early years, from his birth in 1922 to going to work in the comic industry in 1939. We talked about the last segment. We talked about his Army career and his early influences and his early collaborations. And now we're going to move on to Stan's later comic career. But we do want to acknowledge, guys, during his career, again, we talked a lot about his collaboration as an editor there at Marvel with some amazing creators. And we want to just kind of go through some things. Stan Lee created or co-created some of the most iconic characters in the Marvel Universe today that everybody knows, including the Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, working with Bill Everett, Daredevil, X-Men, working with Steve Ditko, Doctor Strange, and, of course, Spider-Man, which is probably one of Stan's most beloved characters, arguably of all time. And he's also worked with, these characters, putting them together in the Avengers. He has worked worked with comic creators on, titles for Captain America. Just about every... Stan has a hand, a finger.
Yes.
In just about every character and place in the Marvel Universe that you've come to love. And we talked a little bit about the years of service that he put in that industry from 1969 to 1972. Stan's last final issue of The Amazing Spider-Man was in July of 1972, and in August, his last episode his last issue of the Fantastic Four, number 125. That's the end of his journey as an editor, as someone working hands-on with these properties. Now, 82, 92, 02, 12. The next 50 years, almost 50 years, the next 48 years, were spent as the face and front man of Marvel Comics, and as an advocate and a promoter for the comic industry, inspiring countless tens of thousands of creative minds, young comic artists and others, through his work and personal appearances, etc. So it's a whole nother career. It's 50 years of a whole nother career promoting the industry far beyond, where it was when he left. So much so, in fact, in the 1970s and 1980s, comics saw a steep decline. And in that decline, many comic fans will know that during these declining years, early television and film projects featuring Marvel comic characters were largely a result of comic book companies selling off their characters to keep the lights on, to keep the doors open. But Stan just hammered away at making these characters endure. And so in 1973, Stan started another career. A related career, though, because he started acting. And I'm going to use the word acting because That's the only way it can be credited in the world, is as an actor. But he started making what would become one of his signature performing appearances, which are film and television cameo appearances.
Have you seen Stan Lee's picture in the 70s? He had, like, the ultimate porn stash.
Oh, yeah, he was groovy, man.
He was.
He was groovy in the... Stan was groovy in the 70s.
I'm telling you.
And again, he was starting a whole nother career. In 1972, he stepped into film and television. In 1973, he began this career as a voice actor in the animated The Year One. And from there, moved on to more familiar products in the Marvel Universe. Again, remember, the comics community is in decline. Comic sales are down. Regulations were steep. The work that Stan had done largely in opening up dialogue using comic characters in issues like race and equality and life equity and these things, were a lot of times under assault as comic books were rotting the minds of our children. And so sales are in decline. Those children are growing up, and they're seeing comic books as more a thing for kids. There's a handful of them we know personally. There are a handful of them that are they've got those comics still. They're still tucked under their bed. They're in nice plastic sleeves. They're being collected for the next generation. Mm-hmm. But it's not a thing we're reading out in the living room as adults. And so
it's like you put your comic book inside of another book, so people don't know.
Yeah. And
I actually, even in well, I'm a child of the 70s. I actually remember my cousins doing that.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, because Graham didn't want you to,
didn't want you to rot your mind.
Be reading those comics.
That's right.
Yeah.
And again, people didn't realize that the hard work and effort and storytelling that went into comics back then. And so Stan's starting what will become a lifelong quest for those characters and those properties. And he's doing it in what is at that time the most popular mediums. And those are film and television. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's an amazing thing, online, many websites are calling it his later career. But that's not even late. I mean, he's in his 40s, and he's young, and he's already retired from one career, moved on to a whole other. And it's like you said, he's got the great porn stash.
He really does.
And he's living the dream at this point.
But he loved doing that cameo work. And we will be blessed when the Untitled Avengers 4 comes out, because Stan did manage to film his appearances.
Well, it's interesting because we just watched we've watched the behind the scenes in some of our collection, our Marvel collection here, and we've seen if they can use his green screen outtakes from other films, then Marvel will never run out of Stan Lee cameos.
That's wonderful.
Because they had multiple iterations of ad-libbed lines filmed.
Yes.
For each cameo appearance, and so they'll just never run out of lines done by Stan Lee.
For anybody who wants to catch them, they do have the Stan Lee bonus footage for the Ant-Man and the Wasp, and it is a riot. He just throws stuff out. They just said, "Hey, go ahead, see what you can come up with."
I imagine somebody was writing, various iterations of his lines and just kept going. Mm-hmm. And
he threw in a zinger or two of his own.
Well, of course, he had a very sharp wit, Stan. Mm-hmm. Everybody who knows, he was very quick, particularly with fans, particularly with people. He was very quick-witted, and we know we have dozens of Hangin' With Web Show, and over the next several weeks, I'm sure we're going to hear stories from a lot of our Hangin' With Web Show alumnus who will tell us their Stan Lee stories.
Yes.
Today I read a neat story from our good friend, the true Aquaman, Rick Stafford.
Yes, Rick Stafford.
And Rick posted a picture. That's an older picture. At the first time he met Stan at a convention, he had to do a photo shoot. So he was in his Aquaman, okay? But it was a very specific photo shoot, and they had to each person had to come as a monsterfied or dead comic book character. And so Rick had kind of this zombie type Aquaman happening. And again, I know there are people out there who there's sort of an ongoing online community debate over DC, Marvel, what kind of comics do you like, kind of thing. But most comic fans are comic fans.
Yes.
They love DC, they love Marvel, they love Simon & Schuster, they love all of it. And, they might have a preference, a character, etc.
Oh, yeah, I'm a Cap girl, so.
I love Cap, and on the DC side, I love Supes. Superman is, rock solid. These are iconic heroes to me. These are the top tier. These are the guys that, you want to aspire to be. Now.
So what happened with Rick?
So Rick goes on to meet Stan in his sort of zombified Aquaman, and Stan, quick-witted that he is, looks over at his handler and looks at Rick, and his eyes get real big, and he looks over and says, "This guy's kind of scary." And but true to the consummate performer and the lover of his fans that Stan was, he gave Rick a few extra minutes to sort of explain the cosplay and why he was all zombified as Aquaman, and they shared that moment, and it was a story that Rick remembered right up till now and shared just today. Actually, I think I read that on Rick's timeline. So it really, really was a an example of that quick wit and fan service that Stan always played to.
I love the story. We're talking about Hangin' With Web Show alums, and I remember when we talked to Funky Mattis, and he holds the Guinness Book of World Records.
Book of World Records for the most celebrity signature tattoos on his body.
Yes, tattoos.
On his back, specifically on his back.
Specifically on his back.
That's right.
Yes, and he was so proud of the Stan Lee.
Yes.
That he had.
Yes.
And I thought that was just so cool. Mm-hmm. So out of all the signatures he had, and we asked him which one was his favorite, and it was Stan Lee. Because it's Stan Lee.
Because it's Stan Lee, that's right. It's truly iconic. To the rest of the world, Stan was an icon. But at home, he was a dad and a husband. When we come back from our break, we're going to talk a little bit about his home life, and then we're going to dive in to how most of a generation got to know Stan Lee. So stay tuned in and stay logged on, and we'll be right back.
Grab some altitude and adventure together at Pound the Grape. It's all about an adventure above the crowd. There's always something different happening there, from painting to food pairings to dancing. But one thing's rock solid, people sharing incredible wines from around the world. And if that's not what puts Lift under your wing, try their craft beer. Grab some altitude and adventure at Pound the Grape. Find more at poundthegrape.com. Poundthegrape.com. Pour a glass of adventure.
How you doing, everybody? This is KG Bethlehem. I'm an author of a new book called Certain Moments of Time. It's a collection of short stories. These short stories range from post-apocalyptic, dystopian, anti-utopia, as well as general fiction. You can find Certain Moments of Time on sale at Amazon.com, where you can purchase the ebook format as well as paperback format. You can also purchase it at Lulu.com, paperback format, and will be on sale soon at BarnesandNoble.com.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Hangin' With Web Show Radio Hour. I'm GW Pomichter.
And I am Sage Ia.
And we are talking Stan Lee. We have been talking about the Marvel Comics and comic icon Stan Lee for the past 45 minutes or so, and we've kind of done a deep dive into Stan's life. Born in 1922, working in comics in 1939, his first writing gig in 1941, joining the Army in 1942. Coming home in 1945 and kicking off what would become an editorial career in comics, later as the publisher of Marvel Comics. Moving beyond that in 1972 and becoming the face. Now, every article that I've read says the face of Marvel Comics. But that is an understatement.
It truly is.
Because I think for 2 generations of comic lovers and comic culture aficionados, Stan Lee was the face of modern comics. So far beyond just his own brand. So much so that, he did things like Stan Lee's, superhero. He did, remember the game, like Become a Superhero kind of thing? It was everybody remember that show? It was, Stan Lee gives you instructions on how to be a superhero, and you get your costume and your secret identity, and you go through these series of challenges, kind of like American Ninja Warrior, only not. I mean, the challenges weren't as physically demanding, but they were demanding in other ways, and things that were, do you show your secret identity? What do you do to help other superheroes? And, these are, so it was a series of tests about how to be a superhero, and, he led by example, and he was teaching, and it was such a great thing to see that in those days. But at home, when he wasn't teaching us about comics and superheroes, Stan Lee was dad, and Stan was a husband. Joan was everything to Stan.
Yes.
He talked about it so many times.
Including his barber.
I want to say that is a special kind of love and commitment right there. Because I don't know about every guy in the world. I know me. I have just enough vanity in me that to let you come near my hair with a pair of scissors is a special kind of trust.
Yes, I can imagine.
And so, obviously, Stan had that with Joan. She passed away in 2017, and Stan truly was heartbroken.
Also, at the age of 95.
Wow. That's something. So, and Stan was the father of 2. He had 2 children. And so he was an all-around guy, man. He was a soldier. He was a creator. He was a dad. He was a husband. And in his later years, we talked a little bit about how Stan turned acting into advocacy, because Stan did appearances and in cameo appearances. He did a lot of different things in television and film that gave a sense of legitimacy to Marvel projects. He started again as a voice actor, acting in episodes of The Amazing Spider-Man and Friends. Remember that,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Look, I was an Electric Company kid.
See?
I loved when that came on.
The early Spider-Man adaptations in Electric Company, yeah. And then he went into regular television and making cameos with the Incredible Hulk, starting in 1989, where he played a juror in the trial of the Incredible Hulk. And he was a juror there, as the transformation to the Hulk.
Do you know that it was an accident that the Hulk was green?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Stanley had he had him as gray originally, and then he had an issue with the printer, and it came back green. And so he didn't want to. He just said, "You know what? We'll keep it that way."
That's
the
pretty
Hulk
cool.
is green. Yeah,
that is a cool piece of trivia. I did not know that.
Yeah.
Did not know that at all.
I'm glad.
Yeah, me too. Because that's sort of those are iconic characters.
Yes, it's not easy being green. Would we have that? It's not easy being green. I know that's Kermit, but still.
Yeah.
All of those green folks had trouble.
Yeah, little, big, doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Just green. Yeah, it's true. But yeah, he started on TV with the Incredible Hulk as a jury foreman in '89, and he went on. And you want to hear something really kind of cool?
I do.
In that career, from 1989 forward, okay, actually from 1973, because you had to count the voiceover work too, all the way to present. Stan, and I know you and I always check IMDb for different statistics on actors and people that we meet along the convention trail, right?
Yeah.
And, it's amazing to see people with, 55, 65, 85 acting credits. Those are full careers, character actors. Amazing. Stan Lee, in his 121 acting credits.
That is so super awesome.
121 acting credits in Stan's career. Including a series of cameos that has been discussed, debated, theorized about.
Yes.
Just torn apart.
Yes.
For more than a decade now. We just passed the 10th anniversary of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Since the launch of Iron Man back in the day. And interesting note, fans, and a lot of fans are going to know this already, fans started discussing Stan's cameos years ago. And kind of, in the advent of social media, a theory rose to the top of all theories about how Stan's cameos could be tied together. And the theory goes that Stan's character was what in the Marvel universe was known as a Watcher.
Yes.
They were a race of aliens that were forbidden to participate, but could see all these different points in history and time and across the multiverse. And I don't know who originated this theory, but it made its way across social media. And it made its way all the way back to Marvel Studios. Mm-hmm. And Stan himself actually dismissed the theory at one point, openly. And then James Gunn was working on Guardians of the Galaxy 2. And he got a kick out of that theory. And so he canonized it. And then there's a scene in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, a brief scene when they're doing kind of their little chase through space, where you see Stan sitting with the aliens that are meant to look like the Watchers, and he's telling his story. And then at the post-credit scene, it picks that up. And he's continuing to tell his story, and the Watchers are getting kind of bored. And so he's actually credited in Guardians 2 as the Watchers' informant. And the stories that he's telling, if you listen to these scenes, are the stories of the cameos that he's made. So thanks to James Gunn and Marvel Studios, Stan Lee's roles, 40 years of roles across the Marvel Universe, his cameos, exist because he is an informant for the Watchers.
Yes.
And that has been canonized in Guardians of the Galaxy 2.
Yes, that was endorsed by Kevin Feige, He said, yep, I'm all about that.
Yeah. No, and again, it comes from, for those, I know the internet knows this already, that was a fan theory. It was one that was dismissed across the board by Marvel creators and different directors and Stan himself. And it was just one of those things that worked its way up through the chain of concern in Marvel. And it made James Gunn smile, so he put it in, and that made Kevin Feige smile, and that makes Marvel fans smile.
Yes.
And to know that Stan Lee is not only a creative icon, not only an excellent spokesman for his industry, but he is himself a character. Mm-hmm. That's a description that has been used about Stan probably on multiple occasions. He's a real character. But he's a character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He is the Watcher's informant.
Do you have a favorite cameo moment? I do.
Boy, a favorite cameo. Tony Stank.
Yes, that's mine. Thank you for that.
Tony Stank.
Yes. Thank you for that.
Only
that
because
is never
it is
going
so
away.
funny. It is because it is. It really, wow. But a favorite, I don't know. I mean, he's got so many great kind of one-liners. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed him in Deadpool. Even though that's not a part of the MCU, it is a Marvel character, and it is, so he had done his cameo in Deadpool. I mean, there's just so many. Wow. Yeah, no, I have to stick with that. The FedEx guy and Tony Stank. That's really, really cool.
That's my favorite. Well, even in Deadpool 2, because he didn't do an actual cameo, they did graffiti of him on the wall.
Well,
he did
a little cameo where Ryan Reynolds actually addresses him. Stop, I don't care what you say, Stanley, or something like that.
That's exactly right.
It's a little cameo there. He's actually got another appearance coming up as Stan in Madness in the Method, which is in post-production here in 2018.
Yes, that's Jay Muse.
Mm-hmm. So that will be interesting to see. He did Kevin Smith's Chasing Amy as a cameo, as himself, giving love life advice, which he would be well suited for. I mean, he was married for over 60 years. That's an accomplishment. She didn't kill him.
No, she broke his typewriter though.
I can see.
She did. She destroyed his favorite typewriter. Yeah.
We're winding down, folks. We're in our last couple of minutes here. This whole hour, I hope we didn't bore anybody. We thought it was worth the time. A large part of what we do is on the road. And at comic conventions, we meet creative minds of all kinds, comic creators and writers and artists and filmmakers, and so much of what we do is in that environment, talking to artists and creators where they gather. And Stanley has been a part of that journey for us, sort of ever present. Everywhere you go, Stan is taking photos, and Stan is doing autographs and talking with fans and inspiring other artists and creators. And
his daughter has announced that she is going to launch, in the memory of her father, the Stan Lee Childhood Literacy Foundation.
Fantastic.
Yes, to continue
Fantastic. That it's amazing the inspiration that he has been to generations, and he's such a part of our world that we had to spend this time and really, let people know that we will miss Stan.
Yes.
But as opposed to grieving right now, we are celebrating the life of Stan Lee, the legacy of Stan Lee,
and the fantastic memories that he helped an entire culture to
truly
cultivate. Yes.
Truly he did. And so we hope if you're listening to this on Krypton Radio, you'll leave a comment maybe down below or on the Hangin With Web Show Krypton Radio page. Let us know your Stan Lee memories. When did you meet Stan for the first time? Where was that? Share your pictures on our Facebook timeline when you see this post there, or over on Twitter or anywhere else. Come to the Hangin With Show or Hangin With Web Show, and share your stories with us. And share your memories of Stan the Man, Stan Lee, 95 years young. We want to start. We're going to stop the show by thanking our partners and our friends at Something Unique Magazine, Off the Chain Radio with author Yvonne Mason, Famous Faces and Funnies, our great friends at Space Coast Comics, Jake and Dave, our great friends over at Pound the Grape, and our terrific folks at Krypton Radio, as well as CBS Radio's radio.com. We couldn't do what we do and do the show without all these great folks helping out and supporting us, as well as all of our featured artists, authors, and creators who supported the show from month to month, every month since we started.
And without you fine folks who tune in and listen.
That's right. Without all of y'all listening out there. This has been an hour of the life and times of Stan Lee. 95 years is a lot to fit into an hour. And it's a little dry, guys, I'll admit. This is, it's hard to stay energetic when you're talking about such an amazing person and an amazing life and having to say goodbye. And so, but thank you all for bearing with us and for hanging out with us tonight and talking about Stan and his life and times. We hope, as Stan put it, that you all have wonderful, happy lives. Be good to each other. Excelsior.
Excelsior.
Thank you.